Alright, welcome back. Now, if I sound less energetic than usual, it's probably because I ate something bad. I feel a little bit sick. I feel like I'm about to throw up. I could throw up any moment, so yeah, trying to avoid doing that. But in any case, it is time to do some performance testing. We are at version 2.1. And recently, a couple days ago, I had the chance to see the game run on a 8 Elite device, and unfortunately all of my worst fears came true and have been confirmed. The 8 Elite gives about the same FPS as the 8 Gen 2, and it gives about the same FPS as the 8 Gen 3. There is minimal difference in performance between these three chipsets. Although they are different in generations, the total performance in the game is the same. And as I mentioned before, the main reason for that, I actually predicted this months ago. The main reason for that is the very bad and old API that the game is using. However, the main difference, the worst difference actually, is the heat output. The 8 Gen 2 does get about 85 to about 85 degrees Celsius. The 8 Gen 3, 92, 95, the 8 Elite crossed the 100 degrees Celsius threshold and it hit 101.7 degrees Celsius. And the next generation will run even hotter because the clock speeds on those chips will be higher and higher. And I do plan to get a device, preferably a tablet, with the 8 Elite 2 sometime next year. So yeah, the worst thing that I feared came true, and it means no matter what device you have, the performance in this game will be the same. Now, I'll be using the same applications that I usually do. We will be seeing the internal temperature and overall the frequencies and stuff like that. I will also do the frame generation or AI interpolation thing that most devices have nowadays, and this is how most of these devices do get a stable, so-called stable 60 FPS. Because if you disable the interpolation and if you disable the frame generation that they have, you get the same FPS as the previous generations, and if you enable the same thing on the old generations, the frame rate is about the same, which is sad because you are not able to take full advantage of a new device on this game. Again, the main reason for that is the API. It's OpenGL's fault pretty much, and at best the game will use about 1 to 3 CPU cores, and if you're lucky, your powerful GPU will use maybe 15-20% of its full capacity, going nowhere near its full speed, and which pretty much makes buying a new device for this game pointless, because if you do buy a new one, well, you'll see the same frame rate. The heat output is not going to be any better, and your experience is going to be roughly the same. So let's jump in and let's play around with the game. Now, usually I like to record my own screen and have the camera at an angle there, but my recorder loves to eat resources. My recorder eats about 30% of CPU, and it impacts the performance quite a bit, so I am kind of forced to record it this way so that the performance isn't being ruined in any way, shape or form. I want to show you just the game running, not the recorder also basically taking resources. And let me just connect my controller, because I just love to play with controllers. With this game the controller is very nice. And here we are. There is the good old OpenGL, the so-called performance destroyer, as I like to call it that way, because it literally does ruin experience and performance on these games. everything will be maxed out. Near the end of the video I will swap to a custom configuration file, but today I'll mostly focus on the default experience with the game, because with the custom configuration file you can get the game to look exactly like the PC version of the game, or pretty close to, and the impact on performance is non-existent, to be honest, because the GPU impact isn't making any huge difference, because the GPU isn't being utilized at all, as we see here. Now, the main thing that there's a lot of mistaking going on. They see the 100% GPU load and assume that the GPU is doing full speed. Every phone basically has different governors, different speeds to make things simpler. You can have 100% utilization, but the frequency will be very low, and therefore the overall total load is pretty low. The highest clock speed that a Gen 2 can hit is 680, or in this case, since this is the overclocked 8 Gen 2, 719 megahertz or 0.71 gigahertz. That's the maximum GPU clock speed that you can see here. Total GPU load is about 50%, and the total CPU load is also around 50%. Now that can go up to 60. When it loads it goes to about 80, but in game it never really uses the full capacity of the CPU. So there is pretty much no bottleneck going on here. There is a lot of CPU left, there is a lot of GPU left. It does hit 60 FPS, and admittedly it is smooth. Now my problem with that is that in order to achieve that FPS, the game is pretty much forcing 1 to 3 CPU cores to do all the work, instead of being more efficient and using all 8 cores. Again, OpenGL is unable to do a proper multi-thread. It's pretty much an old API. The OpenGL that the game is using has been released in the early 2000s, 2005 or 2009, one of these two dates. So we're looking at well over nearly 2 decades now. That's how old the API is that the game is using. That creates a lot of inefficiencies, that creates a lot of unnecessary heating, and it creates a lot of unnecessary bottlenecking. Doesn't matter how fast the chip is, doesn't matter how fast your single core performance is. Currently it's not going to make much of a difference. Doesn't matter if it's 2.5 thousand that this phone scores or 3.5 thousand. The little difference is 1 to 2 frame difference in actual gameplay. Vulkan uses all 8 cores and it utilizes the GPU a lot more, therefore reducing heat and improving performance. It's something that this game desperately needs, and I've been saying this for a very long time because, again, I really care for this game. I want everyone to have the best experience possible, and there is no compatibility issues with Vulkan. Vulkan has been out for over a decade. Ever since Android 7.0, you had Vulkan on pretty much anything. Android 7.0 and up has Vulkan. My old S6 Edge is able to use Vulkan, and it runs better in Vulkan than in OpenGL. I used to play a lot on that device back in the day. So the compatibility excuse on various different GPUs is no longer valid, because that was a problem like 5, 6, 7 years ago. That's an old problem. No longer a thing. Most devices, if not all of them, 99.99%, prefer Vulkan. Vulkan is Android's preferred API. OpenGL is no longer being supported, it's outdated, and modern hardware is made to run with Vulkan. It has OpenGL support for the old applications, basically for old stuff, for 32-bit stuff it has OpenGL support, just to have that support, but it should not be using it for modern applications, for modern games. That's the main problem with this game. They can optimize. We have hit a optimization threshold. You cannot get any better performance than this. With OpenGL, this is the limit. And every new device now that comes along, every new generation that comes along, will suffer from the same problem, will have the same performance, while retaining. Actually, your performance will be the same, yeah, but the heat will be drastically worse and worse because the clock speeds on the new chipsets will be higher and higher. The CPU cores will be larger and larger, and they'll draw a lot more power. And therefore, that will increase the total heat output. While you will have about the same FPS. This is something that we noticed on the G game. That game runs the same way on a Snapdragon 845 and on a 8 Gen 2, 8 Gen 3. They all have the same FPS. They all have the same very blurry visuals, and that game looks awful, to be honest. Yet there is no performance improvements, nothing. It runs poorly on all of these devices, despite being seven, I think now 7 generations difference. And if this game doesn't add proper API support, modern API support, this game will suffer from the same problem on Android. And I think that's not fair to the player, because I didn't buy a €1,000 or $1,000 device to be stuck with 20-year-old API. I think none of us paid that money to be forced into playing a beautiful game like Wuthering Waves in such an outdated and in a such inefficient way. I think towards us, the player, that is pretty unfair, especially when there are much better options out there that will improve our performance, and it will actually justify the money spent into these devices. Because at the moment, I personally cannot recommend that anyone buys a $1,000, $1,500 device for this game, because your performance, if you have a older flagship like 8 Gen 2, 8 Gen 3, 8 Gen 1, your difference in performance will be minimal. There's practically no difference. While you will get more heating, and overall you risk to burn the chip, because let's be real, 85 degrees that we see here is tolerable. I can tolerate that. 90 degrees and up, yeah, it's getting a bit toasty. 100 plus degrees Celsius on the 8 Elite, no, that's getting dangerous for the chip. That's getting into the it can melt type of territory. So, and the problem is not going to go away. You can have the most efficient chip in the world. The bad software, the API basically, it's going to force the CPU cores to go 100%. Doesn't matter how fast it is. That's what I'm saying. It is inefficient. The rendering is inefficient because it wastes power on something that could easily be done on a more efficient way by using all 8 available cores, and all 8 available cores will not have to go 100%. Every core can have like 10, 15, 20% utilization, and they will never get anywhere close to 100 degrees Celsius. They'll get 50, 60 degrees Celsius, which is okay, which is normal temperature. That's tolerable. That's much better than 100 degrees Celsius. And the GPU also take a lot of workload off the CPU cores, and therefore over improving the rendering and improving the total experience with the game. It is still baffling to me why they haven't done that. If I were a developer, I would just go with Vulkan immediately. I've tested over 20, 30 games by now, I think, on and off. Some of them I recorded, some of them I didn't. In every single situation, Vulkan gave much better thermals and much better FPS. I'd done the tests on low-end devices, a Helio G90T, for example, just to give an example, on older flagships that are kind of mid-tier now, like the 865, 870, 855, 860. Some Snapdragon 7 series as well. I tested on those. Vulkan gave much better performance. MediaTek also gives better performance on Vulkan than on OpenGL on most games that I tested out. And the top tier high ends, I mean, there's no need to mention that. The top tier high ends like the 8 Gen 2, 8 Gen 1, 8 Gen 3, and 8 Elite, and the similar chipsets that MediaTek has, all gave much more stable, much better, and even the Exynos gave much better performance on native Vulkan than through Angle, because the Exynos chipsets, they don't have OpenGL drivers. They get OpenGL only through Angle, which is a good. Actually, I've been thinking about getting a Exynos device just because it doesn't have any OpenGL drivers. I really want to get away from OpenGL. Like, that API ruined the experience for me and for so many other players in a lot of games that I'm trying to get away from it in any way, shape, or form. Now, hopefully in March, or just actually not that far off, I'll get Android 15 on my device, and I will attempt to see that Angle translation layer to see how that will improve the performance, because that should technically give me Vulkan backend through a translation layer. Should help with performance, should solve the problems, but I need to get the Android version in order to completely verify that theory. So I have to be patient. That's the thing, because I'm personally getting impatient, because I really believe that they would add Vulkan support. And speaking of Vulkan support, and speaking of the game, they added ray tracing. You cannot get ray tracing on OpenGL. You cannot do that. OpenGL has been made long before ray tracing is bad, and it has never been implemented into OpenGL. So with the OpenGL API, you cannot get ray tracing on mobile. You can enable it in software, but the effect is not going to be noticeable because it simply doesn't recognize the commands. So if they want to give ray tracing to mobile devices, they need to go and change the API to Vulkan, because without Vulkan, there is no ray tracing. And that's a fact. I actually thought that you could get it enabled, and you can get it enabled, as I attempted in one of the last videos, but the effect is not kicking in because OpenGL. So, as I mentioned before, that API is ruining the experience for all of us in this game at the moment. And I'm not trying to be overly critical, although when it comes to performance, I'm quite critical when it comes to this game. I love the game, I think we all do love the game, and we all just want the best for the players and for the game. That's why I basically criticize this, because it needs to be addressed. One of the things that have to be addressed. And I feel like I'm one of the very few ones that point that problem out. I look at the reviews in the Play Store, very good score, but none of them is recommending the right thing that needs to be recommended. And unless we all, unless we focus on a problem, we will never fix the problem. And if we don't fix the problem, it's just going to get worse and worse, as we are already starting to see. We are starting to see the beginning of what I've warned that will happen a couple months ago. I really hope that it gets addressed, because if it doesn't get addressed, we will have some problems with our devices in not too long of a future. I believe with the 8 Elite 2 we will start to see some scary, very scary temperatures with this game because of the rendering inefficiencies. But the FPS has been pretty stable. Very stable 60 FPS, I would say, from now on. For the first test here that we have seen. With Vulkan, it would be even more stable, and the overall stability would just be much, much, much better with a severely reduced heat output. Okay, now I said something about frame generation and frame interpolation and stuff like that our devices have. A lot of them have that, even the mid-range devices have that. Personally, I am not a fan of the frame generation. I am not a fan of interpolation because it ruins the overall image quality. It gives delay. It pretty much makes the whole image, weird in a way. But I have enabled it just to see what kind of performance I'll get. I have set the target FPS to be around 60-70 FPS. I can get up to 120, but not to make it too much of an overkill, because let me be real with you. The delay, the input lag, it's visible. I can feel the input lag when I play on 120 because of interpolation, because of frame generation. It feels, I can feel the lag, and well, here we are now. Let's say I kept it at 70. Okay, it's well, here we are. And now, with this enabled, the FPS will pretty much never dip below 60. This helps if you want to get that fake FPS number up. And it is fake FPS because the way it gets the FPS is pretty much the same way that you get on PC. Again, not a big fan of that at all, because those fake FPS, the interpolation and all that, does encourage poor coding, and it encourages developers not to optimize the game. But you know, I'm not entirely against it, because low-end, medium-end devices can take advantage of it and extend their lifespan. But it is something that should not be relied on to get a good frame rate. So let's run around with interpolation, with frame generation on, and I mean, I don't think you guys can notice any difference visually now, but I can feel the delay. It actually makes my yeah, as I mentioned before, I feel a little bit sick. It actually doesn't help me a lot that it feels a little bit delayed now when it comes to the input responsiveness, and the overall image quality seems a little bit weird. That's the consequence of the frame generation there, or interpolation, whatever you wanna call it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's fake FPS in both cases. Well, yeah, I mean, if Kurov thought, just enable frame generation and problem solved, I'm not going to be satisfied with that. I think I didn't pay €1,000 for fake frames. I'd say the same on PC. I didn't buy an expensive GPU just to have fake frames on it. I want native performance. I think most players want native performance. Let me tell you one thing. Native resolution that I actually target when I play this game. I target native 1080p or 1440p or 2160p. Usually 2160p on this device, because it just works. But native, I turn off FSR, I turn off anti-aliasing, and I get raw. I get raw native performance, and it just looks very good. The game just looks very good. The game looks awesome. I mean, it is beautiful. It is a beautiful game. It just sucks that it is really, really put back by the API that we have the game running in at the moment here. But yeah, I mean, the FPS is now funny. The frame rate is now definitely funny. You can definitely see improvement, although I wouldn't call it improvement, because I don't count fake frames as a improvement, but it's there. I usually have this thing off because, again, I dislike fake frames. I really do dislike fake frames. So I have that off, because the game just looks, feels, and runs. I mean, running better. I guess you have more frames now, but it just looks, feels better when it's off. But yeah, I mean, and I fight bosses much worse way when I have the frame generation on. I feel the delay. I definitely feel the delay. There is no denying it. With Android 15, that should be improved though. But at the end of the day, no matter how much they improve with every Android version update, how much they improve the delay, it's still going to have a delay. It's not going to be anywhere near native performance, native delay. Native will get the least amount of input delay, input lag. And I actually noticed this on iOS devices a lot. They pretty much upscale every single game. They use it feels like they use frame generation and sharpening in every game. And I did a little bit of research, and I found something funny that no matter what scale factor you add for an iOS device, the OS itself immediately puts it back into a lower resolution, and it immediately attempts to upscale it, and it attempts to sharpen the overall image. That's why I always felt like those most of the games on iOS devices look a bit over sharpened and look odd and weird. When I was looking them side by side, I always found the image quality on this device to be better than the image quality on an iOS device, because it felt natural, while on the iOS device it always felt over sharpened. It felt upscaled, and it did have that weird look to it. In games where there is no upscaling, like one of the games I play, War Thunder Mobile, the performance on the iOS device is terrible because they have very weak GPUs, and those GPUs need to rely on upscaling in order to get playable FPS. That's why they have to do it. And honestly, if you ask me, that's what appears to be happening from what I have seen. And if you pay so much money for an expensive device, you should not be relying on upscaling to get a playable FPS. Like, if you see how those frame generation things look and how the AI upscaling and all that stuff looks, you will notice a difference right away. It's a huge, for me at least, I see the difference immediately. So I kind of got to the point where I can easily tell if something is doing the magic tricks, as I like to call them. And if you were to turn off the frame generation or the AI interpolation on 8 Elite or 8 Gen 3, you get the same performance as 8 Gen 2, pretty much, or in some of the older devices. Pretty much every single device will run the game the same way, because of the API, and that's the main problem here. That's the main problem with the game, at least now with version 2.1. I really hope that they do end up fixing that. I mean, I really do hope, but I'm slowly also losing a little bit of hope myself, because I've been talking about this for months now, and so far nothing. But with that being said, we are nearing the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed this little test. If you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe. And with that being said, stay safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.